Hi guys, welcome back to this next video in the Unit 3 Outcome 1 series. And as you can see here, there are actually two key knowledge dot points which we kind of merged together, which I will explain to you now. So here's our study design as per usual. And here we can actually see the two key knowledge dot points. So stakeholders of businesses including, and then it gives us a list of stakeholders, and then characteristics of stakeholders of businesses, including their interests and potential conflicts. So it's all to do with stakeholders. So really, we merge these two key knowledge dot points into 1, 3, and 4, and just call it stakeholders, because this is all to do with stakeholders. So I guess the first question to answer is probably, what is a stakeholder? Now, the first thing I'm going to tell you is what a stakeholder is not. And the reason I'm kind of going here, this is a very specific point to make, but the reason I'm making it is because every year students make this error in answers. So I just want to let you know now to help you avoid, or hopefully so that you will avoid making this error. And that error is that a stakeholder and a shareholder are not the same two things. You cannot use those two terms interchangeably. Now, weirdly enough, a shareholder is one type of stakeholder, but you can't say the same the other way around. You can't say a stakeholder is a shareholder. That actually makes no sense, okay? Do not forget this. From this point forward, do not use those two terms interchangeably. A stakeholder, now here's a definition for you. Now this is a solid definition, and whilst I generally say my advice to you on this course is to not learn definitions like rote, parrot fashion, this is one that I might actually disagree with my own advice here and say this is one that's possibly worth actually learning, this one that you see here, and bringing this one out whenever you might need to. The reason being, stakeholder, once you get the idea through this video of what a stakeholder actually is and some examples of them, you'll understand in your own head what it is, but it's actually one of those terms that's actually quite difficult to define. And this is actually just a really solid definition of it. It's the one that I've seen used many, many times over the years, including a number of textbooks. So it's pretty widely accepted. It totally makes sense. It's short and easy. So I'm just saying maybe learn this definition. Okay, so an individual or a group of people with a vested interest in the operations or activities of a business. Okay, so right now that might not make too much sense to you, but once you see, when we go through the list of examples of stakeholders, that's probably going to make more sense to you. Basically, what we're saying is any person or any group of people that for whatever reason have some kind of an interest in what a business is doing, what it's up to, what are they getting up to, how they operate, how they function. So, for example, and we'll talk about some of these, if anyone who owns a part of a business is obviously going to have an interest in the activities of that business. If you're a customer of a business, you therefore have a vested interest, and we'll look at what that vested interest might be. If you live in the same community where a business operates, you might have an interest because of you want the business to operate in a certain way. Ethics and social responsibility is kind of where we're going to go with that. But basically, anyone that has any kind of an interest in the operation of a business is classified as a stakeholder, okay? Now, they can come from within the business, and those are the internal environment. If you think back, if you did year 11, we looked at the internal environment and the external environment as a couple of outcomes in Unit 1. Or they come from outside of the business, which would be the external environment. Now, why are stakeholders important? Why do we look at them? Why is it important to even think about them? Okay. The point is with stakeholders is that they all have different interests in the business. So while we just define stakeholders as people, individuals or groups who have a vested interest in the business, the reality is that each group of stakeholders has different interests in that particular business. And one of the challenges that managers or business owners face is trying to satisfy the needs and the wants of all of those different stakeholders. Okay, this can be really, really difficult, and we get to see some actual examples of that play out at the end of this video when we look at conflict, which was actually part of the second bullet point within this sort of double bullet point within the study design. So going back to the study design. So we're looking at the first bullet point here, stakeholders including blah, 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 blah. So they're the ones that are listed. Okay, so there's 6 of them listed in the study design. Again, the reality is that in real life, there are many, many more stakeholders than this. But again, stick to the script. These are the ones identified in the study design. These are the ones that you can be asked about. These are the ones that any question that you could possibly be asked could be answered by using. So do not vary from these 6. These are the ones. Study design, yep, it's simplified. They're not the only ones that exist in reality, but study design says these are the 6. Let's stick with the 6. So we'll just take them in turn now and look at what their interests might be. So first off, owners. Okay, so these are from the internal environment. Yeah, they're part of the business. Now, just a bit of language before we actually look at their interest. For a sole trader or a partnership, we refer to them as owners of the business. But if we're talking about a company, either private limited or public, either or, then we refer to them as shareholders. So look, this is just a matter of language and being accurate in our use of language. If you talked about owners, when we're talking about a company, it kind of doesn't make sense. When we're talking about owners of a business, it would hint that we're talking about a sole trader or a partnership. Similarly, the other way around there. So just get used to that language. Use the language that you see there to refer to the ownership of those particular types of business that way. Now, what is their interest in the business? Well, obviously, assume it's obvious, that they want the business to operate profitably. These are the owners of the business. They're going to be seeking a return on their investment, so they want the business to be profitable. Now, shareholders, remember we're talking about a company here, and this actually here, when we're talking about this second bullet point here, we're actually really talking about a public company. So we're talking about shares here. So shareholders in a public company would want to see their share price increase, which means they're getting capital appreciation. So in other words, capital meaning something that you own. If you own shares in a business, you want the share price to go up, because for every dollar the share price goes up, your asset, your capital increases by $1 multiplied by the number of shares you own. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. And a good dividend yield. Now, when you own shares in a public company, as anyone in Australia can do at 18 years of age or above, as we've talked about, when you own shares twice a year, usually twice a year, it can vary from that, can be every 3 months, but usually it's twice a year, the company pays dividends on those shares. So it's a percentage for every dollar value of share that you hold. So they might say in June pay a 4% dividend. So for every dollar in shares that you own, you would receive a 4-cent return. That's what we call dividend yield, and that's a form of income. So basically, shareholders are looking for capital appreciation plus some kind of income in the form of a dividend yield. Also, owners of a business generally want those businesses to be operating ethically and in a socially responsible manner. CSR, that's not a term that's new to anyone that did the Year 11 course, Corporate Social Responsibility. It's something, again, we talked about quite a bit in Year 11, and we'll be talking about constantly through Year 12 as well. But for those who this concept is new to, once I've talked about the stakeholders, I'm going to look in a little bit more detail about corporate social responsibility. Because actually, before I do that, when I'm looking at the interests of these different stakeholders, it's even going to crop up a few times here as well. So it's a very common theme. So I'll explain a little bit about corporate social responsibility and what all that is shortly in this video. So that's the interest of owners. I think that's pretty straightforward. They want to make money out of the business, essentially. That's what we're talking about right there, other than the operating in a social responsibility way. Stakeholder 2, managers of a business. So these are part of the internal environment. They make up, or they're part of the business itself. So what are managers looking for from the business that they work for? They're looking for job security. They're looking for career development, looking for job satisfaction, all of that kind of good stuff, which you guys, if you have a part-time job at the moment, you're probably not looking for a lot of that stuff. You might be looking for job satisfaction, but you're probably not looking so much for security and career development because this is your part-time student job. This is not, generally speaking, the career that you're looking to do after school. But a manager in a business, generally, this is the sort of thing they're looking for from that job. They're also looking for fair or competitive remuneration. Remuneration, kind of a fancy word for pay, but it involves not just pay. There can be other forms of payment, particularly that managers receive: share options, gym memberships, company cars, all sorts of different stuff. And all of that stuff in its entirety forms the remuneration that a manager would receive. But essentially, pay is the predominant part of it. Managers are probably also looking to be involved in decision making and the setting and achieving objectives in the business. And again, like owners with the previous one, they're also generally looking to work for a business that demonstrates corporate social responsibility. Okay, so there are 4 different interests that we could say that managers have of the business that they work for. Stakeholder 3, again, sticking to our script, the ones identified in the study design. Now employees, again, internal. Now, realistically, we just looked at managers. Now, managers are also employees. Like, managers are a particular subset of employees. They're the employees that tend to be, they have responsibility positions within a business, managing the business, managing the people. But essentially, they are also employees. So the list of what, the interests that employees and managers have of a business, there's definitely going to be crossover because they're essentially the same thing, just a different type of that same thing. So once again, employees are probably looking for job security. They could be looking for career development. Now, I say sometimes there because, look, some employees just want to go to work, get the paycheck and go home and not worry about it. Whereas managers tend to, that's why I would say career development is more likely with the managers in our previous list, because managers are more likely to be on some kind of career trajectory. They're not just there for the pay. They want to develop their career. They want to progress their career, not necessarily within that business, but in a general sense. But with employees, sometimes that's the case. Sometimes that is not the case. Job satisfaction, definitely. I think that applies to anyone that goes to work. You want to feel some kind of sense of job satisfaction. Again, fair, competitive remuneration, because if you're not, you're probably going to look elsewhere and get another job. And again, to work for a business that demonstrates CSR. So you can see this concept CSR is now cropped up with all 3 of our stakeholders so far, which is why I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about it in a few minutes. Stakeholder 4, customers. Now we're moving external to the business. So these are part of the external environment using that Year 11 language. So what is a customer's interest in a business? Probably number 1, they want to receive quality goods and or services, whatever it is they're buying from that business, at a fair or reasonable price. So if you think about any business that you interact with as a customer, so you basically shop at that business, number 1 thing you're probably looking for is exactly that. Okay, you want the best product or service that you can get at the fairest, most reasonable price, would be fair to say. Something else you might be looking at is high levels of customer service, and that could be pre-sale or post-sale. Now, to be fair, a lot of companies are very strong on the pre-sale customer service because they still see that as part of the process that is going to get them the sale. A lot of companies are not so strong on the post-sale service that they offer customers because often businesses are a little short-sighted and they think, I've got their money now, I don't have to look after them anymore. Not thinking, and this sounds crazy when you say it this way, but this is true of a lot of businesses, too short-sighted to see that if you don't look after customers in the long run, like after you've sold them your product or service, then they might not become repeat customers. And repeat customers is very, very important for business. And we look at that later in the course too. Again, for the fourth time, another stakeholder group that wants to buy from businesses that demonstrate social responsibility. If we have the choice of two products and really everything else being equal, but one business is known to be ethical and socially responsible and one is not, the chances are most people are probably going to buy from the business that demonstrates social responsibility. Okay, we just want to buy from businesses that do the right thing, okay, and do not act in an unethical way. Makes sense. Now, the fourth one I've got here, I've kind of grayed out a little. This is definitely valid, but I would say I've kind of grayed it out because this wouldn't apply to everybody, but I think an increasing number of people. And that's this idea of supporting Australian business and buying Australian-made goods, okay? Increasingly, customers are looking for this. And you see this in the advertising by a lot of products. Like if it is an Australian-made good or if, the ingredients come from Australia, anything like that, a lot of the advertising tends to focus around that. And also, actually, myself coming from England, this is something I've noticed because this is not something that is really a big thing in England. Like people in England tend not to really be particularly fussed about where things are made or where they're produced in the same way that Australians are. Australians, it was very noticeable to me coming here, have this kind of very patriotic view about supporting Australia, supporting Australian business, which, like I say, certainly doesn't really exist in that way in England, and I think a lot of other countries not too. So although it doesn't apply to everybody, like I think, the first three probably do, it's still important enough, I think, to include on the list because that would apply to a lot of people, this idea of buying Australian, okay, buying Australian at all cost. Stakeholder 5. So again, sticking to our script, the fifth one mentioned in the study design was suppliers. Again, external environment. Now remember, a supplier is a business that supplies the business, your business, with whatever goods and services you need to operate your business. Okay, so for example, the school has lots of suppliers. One of them would be the business that we buy our stationery from. I think a school go to a lot of paper. So I think a couple of times a month, a huge amount of paper is delivered, A4, reams of A4 paper, reams of A3 paper. We obviously go through a lot of that. So I think it might be Office Max, who the school supplier is for that. So there's an example of what we mean by supplier. Okay, Office Max is a supplier to our school. So what is their interest? What is Office Max's interests with regards to our school? What is, generally speaking, a supplier's interest as regards to the businesses that they're supplying? So number one, receive ongoing orders. Okay, they want to keep doing business with you. Okay, they want you to remain a customer because if not, that's a customer that they've lost. Obviously not a good thing. Establish and maintain a long-term relationship with you. That's linked in with the first one. Okay, if you're going to establish and maintain a long relationship with your customers, then you're more likely to keep those customers into the future. Okay, maintain that source of income. And a third thing, to be paid on time. Now, that sounds very obvious, and I won't go into details here, but in class I might talk about this one. It's surprising how often this does not happen, particularly when the supplier is a much larger business than the receiving business, if you like. Often payment is withheld for periods of time. It's kind of unethical, but it's something that goes on a lot in business. But just for now, just get in your notes, to be paid on time is one of the things that suppliers are seeking from the businesses that they supply to. Okay. And then the sixth and final one, the general community, again, external to the business. Probably the main thing that they're looking for is the businesses that operate within the community is for those businesses to be acting or operating in an ethical and socially responsible way. So again, that crops up. They also benefit from the employment opportunities created by the business. So if you have a business operating in a community, obviously that's a source of employment for that community. So that's something that they would be interested in maintaining. And also perhaps that the business kind of participates in the community, kind of gets involved with the community. For example, one way to do that is through local sports sponsorship. So you notice a lot of the local footy, cricket teams and all that sort of thing around our area. they have the name of a business on their shirts, either on the front or the back. That's local businesses getting involved and sponsoring those particular teams. It's a way that business can participate in the community. Obviously, it's advertising for them as well, but there's kind of an expectation for businesses to get involved in the community in some way. That's one way we can do it. Now, corporate social responsibility. I said I was going to talk about this, so let's look at this in a little bit of detail. This, again, is something we're going to be touching on as it relates to particular parts of the course as we move through the course, but just to kind of introduce the general concept, particularly to those who this is a new concept to for now. So, corporate social responsibility refers to, that basically is a definition for you. And again, for the second time of this video, I'm going to ignore my own advice or tell you to ignore my advice about learning definitions or not learning definitions. I'm going to say to you, probably learn this one. Okay, this definition of CSR was provided by VCAR in the examiner's report for the 2019 exam as an example of a very high scoring response to the question, define corporate social responsibility. Now, one of the best sources that we have or resources that we have available to us is the examiner's reports from each of the exams every year, because they tell us whenever a question is asked, it gives us what VCAR thinks is a good answer to that type of question. So this is an example of that. So if VCAR have said to us, we think this is a good answer, why not, when they ask that same question again, give that answer back to them? Also, with social responsibility, it is a term, if you try to, like in your own mind, you'll have an idea of what it means, what it is. But it is one of those terms that often when people try to come up with a definition kind of, off the cuff, it sometimes doesn't quite work. So I'm just going to put it out there. This might be one worth learning. And kind of one of the reasons for that is it's kind of two aspects. Okay. CSR, as I'm going to say, instead of corporate social responsibility every time, CSR from this point forward. It's about a business going above and beyond legal obligations for a start. That's one aspect of this. For a business just to be meeting legal requirements or meeting the law, not breaking the law, that's not being social responsible. To be social responsible, to be operating in a way that demonstrates CSR, you have to be going above and beyond that, okay? And then the second aspect is the purple part there about in relation to or with respect to social, economic and environmental considerations. Really social and environmental being really the key there. So in some way, going above and beyond what the business has to do with regards to society, with regard to the environment. That's kind of the gist of what it means. To help you understand and put that definition in some context, here's some examples of things that businesses might do that demonstrate social responsibility. And again, this is just a real kind of short list now, just to give you some examples as we go through the rest of the course, and we're going to be applying CSR to the various bits of content that we cover. There'll be some lots and lots more examples specific to that content. This is just kind of a bit of a list just to introduce you to the idea. So, for example, a business would be demonstrating CSR if they're using renewable energy where possible. Okay, if they're recycling their materials, so any paper, plastic, glass that they might produce or use, recycling that. Reducing their waste as much as possible would be a CSR activity. Reducing the carbon footprint that they create, however they create that, whether that's that could be by, look, if they use heavy machinery, which has a potential to pollute the environment, somehow reducing that pollution. It could be from getting their suppliers from closer to the business rather than further afield, because then there's less of a carbon footprint being created in the delivery of those resources, anything like that. Using fair trade ingredients, fair trade, the coffee industry, the chocolate industry are two that kind of focus quite heavily on that. And the branding of businesses that do use fair trade ingredients tend to be quite heavily focused. The marketing tends to be quite focused on the fact that they are fair trade. Another one, employing local workers as opposed to offshoring various aspects of your business. Something else we'll look at in more detail later. But yeah, employing Australians as opposed to employing overseas workers. I think you'll kind of get that concept. So all of those things, if you think about it, these are not things that legally you have to do, right? These are things that businesses are choosing to do if they do choose to do these things, which are going above and beyond the legal requirements, but they all link back to the community or the environment in some way, which is why they fall within the realm of being CSR activities or actions that a business might choose to take. Okay. Couple more for you. Sourcing suppliers, ingredients locally as opposed from overseas, supporting the community and or charities through philanthropic activities, sponsoring, again, going back to sponsoring a local team, allowing employees to donate some time for good causes. That's actually increasing things. So some big businesses now say, right, to your employees, right, you have 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, whatever it might be, to actually not come into the office and work, but you can go out and work for a charity or a cause of your choice. Okay, that's becoming kind of a bit more of a thing these days. Providing a flexible workplace for employees. Okay, that's again something we'll look at in a bit more detail later on in the course, and that's a huge one, particularly post-COVID. So that's something we'll definitely be talking about a bit later on. Just to give you an actual example, if you need one. So if in a question you're asked us, could it provide a real example of where a business is demonstrating social responsibility? Look, pretty much any big business now, if you look at the website, there's going to be a section on their website about how social responsible and how ethical they are and how wonderful they are, blah, 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 blah. Let's look at Woolies here. Okay, Woolies have got a real big focus on this. We're growing even greener. Green, it's kind of lucky that their branding is green anyway, because that really fits in with the whole being green and environmentally friendly. Even on their trolleys, they've got the logos pushing for a greener future. You see these recycling stations in the supermarkets. So there's lots of very visible stuff that Woolies do to make it very clear to their customers that we are a socially responsible business. We're an ethical business. We're looking after the planet. Blah, 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 blah. Here, some of this stuff is visible, some of it not so much so. But here's some of the things that Woolies actually are committed to at the moment in terms of their social responsibility. So this is part of their social responsibility plan, if you like. Okay, so they've redesigned their packaging in the last couple of years to use 75% less plastic than what was used previously, obviously, because plastic in landfill, damaging to the environment. There's a target in place of 100% of its home brand products, packaging being reusable, recyclable, or compostable by 2023. So this was put in place a few years ago. Obviously, we're now approaching that target. I'm not sure how far along or how close they are to achieving that target, but that's in place. Own brand tissues, toilet, kitchen paper, all of that stuff, sustainably sourced. Okay. Makes sense. The Red Cycle program, this is what I just showed you previously, the recycling program they have in place, has collected since 2017 over 3,700 tons, blah, 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 blah. Again, big focus, customers, very visible to the customers, because this is also used not only to be environmentally friendly and socially responsible, this is also used as a kind of a marketing ploy to attract customers away from the competition, because as I said before in this video, customers like to buy from socially responsible businesses. In 2018, you will remember, I'm guessing, the free single-use plastic bags that were got rid of. And they replaced them with these ones that we have at the moment, the slightly thicker, more heavy-duty ones, which you pay 15 cents for. So they got rid of those free-use ones. And I think the other supermarkets have all followed suit by now, because they were really damaging environments. So many of these things were ending up in waterways, in the ocean, in landfill, really not good for the environment at all. They got rid of those. And then in June 2022, so 6 months ago at the time of recording this video, they announced they're actually going to get rid of those 15-cent plastic bags as well. So they'll be getting rid of all plastic bags from checkouts and moving to just, I guess like the cloth bags and that sort of thing. So it's taking that, getting rid of the free use ones like a step further. Okay, just touching on some advantages and disadvantages to a business of implementing these kind of strategies, or of just basically being socially responsible. The advantage, improved reputation in the community. I've said that a couple of times now. People want to buy from socially responsible businesses. So by demonstrating social responsibility, you're improving the reputation of your business. You improve the reputation of your business, more people will buy from you, which means you increase sales. Improved employee satisfaction, because again, we said one of the interests that the stakeholder group of employees, or employees and managers both have, is to work for a socially responsible business. So if people feel that they are working for a business that demonstrates those values, they're going to be more satisfied, which means they're going to stay with the business rather than leave, which means staff retention. Retention means retaining people, retaining your employees, so improve retention. A more efficient use of resources. This links back to the idea of recycling. So if we're sort of recycling, repurposing some of our resources, that is probably going to increase in a more efficient use of those resources. And then all of those things that I just talked about, the three first bullet points there, all of those things lead to either increasing income. So if you increase sales, that's an increase in income. Improving staff retention, that actually reduces cost, because when staff leave the business, there is a pretty serious cost to replacing them. And again, that's something we actually look at in Unit 2. And all of those things, increasing income or reducing cost, both of those things lead to an increase in profit. Okay, so all of those first three bullet points the end result of that is increasing in profit. What's the downside to all of this? Really, there are very little. Time consuming potentially, but really the number one downside to all of this stuff is generally it is more expensive. So basically it is more expensive usually to operate in an ethical and a socially responsible way than it is to not. Having said that, the way businesses see this is as an investment, because okay, it might be more expensive in the short run to implement these strategies and to do this stuff, but because of these advantages that we see here, in the long run, that investment kind of pays back in the form of increased sales or reduced costs. So really, generally more expensive, probably more in the short run, I would say. Now, the final part of the puzzle here. So we've now covered the first bullet point that you see on the screen there. Now we move on to the second bullet point, which is potential conflicts between stakeholders. Okay. I said early on in the video that one of the challenging things for managers and business owners to do is manage and satisfy all of the different wants and needs of these various groups of stakeholders. That's kind of where we're going with this one right here. Okay, potential conflicts between these simplified six group of stakeholders. So there are our stakeholders. Okay, they're the six we've looked at. So what we're saying is, if you consider the interests of managers in a business and the interests of customers of a business, they don't align. Managers are wanting a different thing from businesses than what the customers of that business want. And sometimes those interests collide, conflict, are at odds with one another, which makes it difficult to satisfy both sets. Similarly, the owners of a business are going to have different interests from the suppliers to a business. And again, there might be some kind of conflict between the interests of those two particular stakeholders. Owners and employees similarly. So you could do this like with multiple pairings here, okay? Managers, general community, so on and so forth. So let's give you some actual examples of some of these pairings to see how this kind of works. So let's take managers v customers, okay? Managers have a set of interests in a business. We already looked at those, so you could look previously at your notes and see those. And then we also looked at the interests that customers of a business have. Now, if you look at those two lists next to one another, they're not the same, okay? There's going to be conflict here. So let's look at where this conflict can actually occur. Now, managers of a business, they want to be charging the highest price possible for the goods or services that they're selling because that's going to make them the most money. But customers want to pay the lowest price possible. So there, right off the bat, there's a conflict in interest. Managers want to get the most amount of money. Customers want to pay the least amount of money. There's an area of conflict. Another area of conflict could be it's expensive for managers to provide high levels of particularly post-sale customer service. So we talked about customer service earlier, and I did talk about post-sale, especially when times are hard. So for example, when COVID hit and businesses were doing it tough, they lost a lot of their customers. They couldn't operate in the way that they were used to operating. So times were tough. It's expensive then to focus on offering high levels of customer service, but customers expect those high levels of customer service at all times. So again, conflict in the interests of those two groups of stakeholders. Third one I've got here, sometimes managers might need to change a product or a service when faced with other business pressures, okay? I'm just giving you a very specific example here. It's called shrinkflation, and I'm mentioning Cadbury, but a lot of businesses have done this. So a little while ago, Cadbury's actually reduced the size of their sharing bars, or some people refer to them as their family bars, from 200 grams to 180 grams, okay? Unless you saw the two side by side, you might not necessarily know that, or if you actually looked at the numbers, if you see when it tells you 200 grams in the bottom right-hand corner or 180 grams, but they didn't change the price. So the reason they did this was because production costs were increasing. They didn't want to increase the price to consumers, okay? Because, as soon as a business increases, if Cadbury's have increased the price of their chocolate bars, people might then go to an alternative brand, okay? So increasing the price to consumers, to customers, is something that businesses usually want to avoid. So instead of doing that, what they did is actually reduced in a very subtle way, and they didn't exactly advertise this fact, reduced the amount of product that customers actually got. So they increased the profit margin in a slightly more clever way. So yes, shrinkflation. A lot of businesses do this. Shrinkflation is kind of the umbrella term that is used for this. And again, there's clearly a conflict in interest. The customers are no longer getting the best value, but the manager's doing this to save money. Hopefully that makes some sense. So there's a pretty common. So if you're asked to explain how conflict could occur between two stakeholders, this is one that you could use as an example. Another one, owners v suppliers. Business owners want to receive their supplies for the lowest price possible. So I mentioned the school before and Office Max. We want to get the paper that we buy a lot of paper, right, at the school. We get through thousands and thousands of reams every month. We want to be buying that for the lowest price we possibly can. But those suppliers, Office Max in this case, I think, want to receive the highest price that they can for those supplies. So again, conflict. Business might want to change supplier for a certain reason, okay? So businesses are constantly evaluating their supply lists and looking around, can I get this stuff cheaper from somewhere else? Is there a better supplier, a more reliable supplier? So for a number of different reasons, a business might change suppliers, okay? But that supplier doesn't want to lose the custom of that particular business. So again, conflict in interest. Larger businesses often don't want to pay their suppliers on time. And again, I kind of touched on this one before. And that can often make life really, really difficult in terms of cash flow for those smaller businesses that they're supplying. And I would, in my class, give some real examples of that. But yeah, that's a very, very real issue in the business world. And I've seen that in action myself a number of times in different businesses that I've worked for. And again, so there's your conflict. Bigger businesses want to hold on to their money. The smaller business that is using their goods want to, or that is providing those goods, want the money for those goods. Okay, so might take a bit of explanation, but yeah, that's kind of how that one works. The next one, owners versus employees. Business owners don't want to pay high wages to their staff, well, within reason, but staff want the highest pay they can get. And when I say within reason, as a business owner, it's probably not the best move to just pay the least amount you can get away with, because what happens then? Your staff are not going to be happy. They're probably going to look for another job and they're going to leave. Okay, and you don't want that to happen. But generally speaking, okay, business owners don't want to be, business. If I own a cafe, I don't want to be paying my staff $100 an hour, but the staff, if they could get $100 an hour, would love it. So, there's this, you end up somewhere in the middle, clearly. Staff are increasingly looking for work-life balance options, WLB, particularly post-COVID now. But business owners, and this is becoming a real issue in the business world, business owners now really want their workers back in the office. Okay, there's a real push for business owners, business managers to get their teams back in the office. But those employees have now seen COVID kind of gave them a taste of work-life balance in a way they'd not seen before. They want to be staying from home, particularly if technology allows them to do their job at home. A lot of them are like, well, why would I come back to the office? So there's definitely a really increasing area of conflict that we're seeing out in the business world at the moment. Final one I've got there, employees are increasingly expecting their employees to be operating with high degrees of social responsibility around employment conditions. So more holidays, high maternity and paternity leave, that sort of stuff. But for a business to be meeting those expectations, there's a high level of cost. Obviously, if you go from giving all your staff 4 weeks holiday leave a year to 6, there's going to be a significant cost of doing that. So you've got the expectation and then the reality of what the business can provide. And again, there's that conflict, that difference in expectations. The last one I think we're going to talk about, managers versus general community. So this gives you a good range of different scenarios or different combinations of stakeholder conflict that you could talk about. Sometimes when faced with business pressures, for example, reduced profit, or even if a business is making a loss, managers might seek to make some employees redundant. It's one of the most common ways. If businesses need to cut costs quickly for whatever reason, making redundancies is a really common way to go about doing that. That can have a really big impact on the local community, particularly in country towns, when that particular business, if it's a larger business, actually supports a lot of the employment in that particular town. So again, conflict of interest. There might be ways for business to reduce costs by operating in a less environmentally friendly manner, but that might actually have a negative impact on the local community. So, for example, pollution. So a business is trying to reduce this cost of operation, and one way to do that might be to, produce some pollution. That is not what the local community wants. So again, this stakeholder interest in terms of reducing costs and making more money on the part of the business completely conflicts with the needs of the community to not have their environment polluted. Okay, so hopefully all that makes some sense to you. So just summarizing, okay, so they're going back to that double key knowledge dot point. First off, definition of a stakeholder, make sure you've got that down. Then we looked at each of those 6 different stakeholders that the study design identified and looked at what their interests in a business are. Then we looked at social responsibility. And so I kind of threw this in here because it cropped up in that particular key knowledge dot point, but it's going to be cropping up throughout the whole course. And then finally, we looked at some examples of potential conflict between those stakeholder groups. So in those 4 things there, we've covered everything in the 2 key knowledge dot points on the study design. So that is it for stakeholders. That's the end. I know it was a fairly long video. I apologize for that, but there was a bit to get through. I will see you in the next one. Cheers for now.